supervising fire marshal in Brooklyn, New York, who converted to Islam as a young man.
I felt a kinship to him also personally, and there's probably about 1 billion Muslims who would say the same thing personal, and this personal kinship that they feel with him. He grew up an orphan. Now, I'm not an orphan. I have 2 parents, but my position in society, I've always felt separate. America is a racial nation, and either you're black, you're white, you're Italian, you're Jewish, you're this and that. So coming from a mixed background, I felt like kind of in limbo. My father is Native American and African American, and my mother is Jewish. They were very a-religious, I would say, to the point of being atheists or agnostic. I recall as a child, we get a dreidel on Hanukkah, that we had a menorah in the house, and we also had a Christmas tree and exchanged presents. So I just never really identified with any religion, but what was always emphasized was discussion and dialogue and seeking for the truth. So I went through a period of trial and error searching, and I stumbled, I guess I almost literally stumbled on Islam. What appealed to me was the universality of the message. Any religion that gives a code of righteous, ethical conduct and respect and gratitude and obedience to one being is Islam. So here is a book, the Holy Quran, that validates other religions, the diversity of mankind, and it puts the onus of salvation on the believer. The Quran teaches you that the saving of one life is as if you saved all of humanity. And that's one of the reasons why I became a firefighter. What more noble calling than that, to save a person's life, to save people, to save their property?
There's another fire in the back. There's been a couple fires here.
Okay, yeah, so show me what you have. From being a firefighter, I became a fire marshal. That's an arson investigator.
How long has this been vacant?
That's another form of prevention, of saving lives. Well, I guess there's no doubt what caused this. A firefighter, he'll risk his life to save you, whether you're black, brown, red, Jew, Muslim, Christian, atheist. He's not asking you what your philosophy is or looking at your color. He's looking to get you out of the building.
The owner's from Brooklyn.
That's why many people say that firefighting is a calling, because of that self-sacrifice, the willingness to just put others before yourself. To be a good Muslim, you serve people. And specifically, Prophet Muhammad, he asked the question to people around him: do you love your Creator? Serve your fellow man first.
The message Muhammad had received from God revealed that his people would be held accountable in the next life for their behavior in this one. Although Muhammad was initially reluctant to tell others about his experience, a new revelation commanded him to make his message public.
So he calls all of his family members together and he says, what would you say if I told you that there was this army waiting to attack us on the other side of that hill? They said, we would believe you. And he said, what would you say if I told you I'm a messenger from God? I think it's absurd. You called us together for this? And he says, will no one support me in this? And the only person is a child, Ali, who's his cousin, gets up and says, I will support you. And they think this is hilarious, that this is who's going to follow this prophet is a child.
Think about it. There's a man, a middle-aged man, who doesn't know how to read or write, who has no wealth, who is an orphan. Yes, he is from a very important tribe, but he works for a woman. And he now says, I'm the prophet. God has spoken to me. This is not going to fly.
The divine message that Muhammad brought to his fellow Meccans carried with it a sharp warning for their increasingly materialistic society.
He was coming to warn the people of Mecca and the surrounding countryside and his own tribe of Quraysh that unless they pulled themselves together and started creating a more just and decent society, restoring the old tribal values of looking after the poor, the orphan, the widow, the oppressed, then there was going to be a terrible catastrophe.
The Arabs did not believe in afterlife. They really thought that life ended with death, and there was no resurrection, there was no coming back, there was no reincarnation.
So now Muhammad is saying, you know that one God we spoke of? When you're going to die, you don't just disappear, but you're going to be accountable to that God for the good deeds and the bad deeds.
He was bringing a moral, ethical, social message to his people, that we're all in the same boat before God and we must treat each other well with compassion and justice and equity.
The revelation Muhammad received on the Mountain of Light was only the first of many that he would continue to receive for the rest of his life.
The revelation does not come in a lump sum. It doesn't just come down from heaven, here's the book, now go out and teach it to the people. No. It is coming down slowly. It's coming down as events unfold. And it's explaining the events, but it's also coming down in a way that he can absorb it. Because the idea is that this thing is so tremendous, this thing is so immense, that it's not something that we can give you all at once. This is going to take time.
He used to say that I never once experienced a revelation without feeling that my soul had been torn from my body.
The Prophet could be sitting, he could be on horseback, he could be walking, he could be talking, but was suddenly seized by the divine word.
He would feel a great weight descend upon him. He would sweat profusely, even on a cold day. Sometimes, he said, it would be like the reverberations of a bell, and that, he said, is hardest for me. It's not the words that were coming, but he'd have to listen very hard for the meaning of what communication, divine communication, was coming through.
After Muhammad received each revelation, he would recite it to the people who were with him, and they would pass it on to the community.
When the Prophet, who did not know how to read and write, started revealing the words of the Quran, they acquired credibility because of the very nature of the words spoken. People would look at it and say, my goodness, this cannot be the words of a man. He could not have made this up.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم.
The Quran is the most extraordinarily beautiful discourse. It doesn't come over in translation, but the Arabic is extraordinary. When the first Muslims heard the Quran, many of them were converted to the Prophet's message, not necessarily because of its content, but because of its beauty.
That revelation was presented in a society where there were people who were professional memorizers. They could hear something recited once and they could repeat it. The recitation then by Muhammad was carefully preserved immediately in the minds of memorizers and in the minds of people who were able to write down notes. What we now call the Quran represented the complete collection of those words that Muhammad recited when he said, "This is the revelation of God."
All we have of the Prophet and all we have of the Word of God is actually words. We don't have any pictures. We don't have any statues. All we have left is words. We can take those words, and through the art of calligraphy, we can make them more vivid, more accessible.
For Muhammad Zakaria, words are the basis of an art form. To prevent idolatry, Muhammad discouraged the creation of any images of himself or other prophets. Calligraphy eventually became Islam's highest art form. Among the sacred texts that Zakaria writes is the Hilya, a portrait of the Prophet in words.
Transmitted from Ali, who, when asked to describe the Prophet, would say, "His face was not narrow, nor was it fully round, but there was a little bit of roundness to it. When he looked at someone, he looked at them with his face turned perfectly towards them. Whoever saw him unexpectedly was in awe of him, and whoever associated with him familiarly loved him. Anyone who would describe him would say, I never saw before him or after him the like of him. Peace be upon him." That's the most famous of the Hilyas. It gives you a description of the qualities of a person so that you can almost see them in your eyes, in your mind's eye. I like to think it's like having a little memento of the Prophet near you so that you can look at it and think of it now and then. And of course he's not with us, but the Hilya brings him his presence a little closer.
Muhammad was always very insistent that he was not a divine figure, and he always warned his followers not to do with him what the Christians had done to Jesus and put him on a pedestal and say that he was God or divine. He was not. He was an ordinary human being, and the Muslims have taken that seriously. But what they do say is that Muhammad is the perfect man. That if you look at Muhammad, you can see how a perfect act of surrender to the divine can be made.
Allahu Akbar.
Muhammad's message slowly began to attract followers, especially among the downtrodden and the oppressed within Meccan society.
It's really the people that don't have anything to lose and everything to gain. They're the ones that are responding to this message. Many of the followers are poor people, slaves, women that don't have protectors. It's spreading amongst the disenfranchised of Mecca.
Prophet Muhammad noticed that he lives in a society that downgraded women. They were viewed as second-hand citizens, an object of personal belongings that belonged to the man. And that disturbed the Prophet.
Early in his prophetic career, Muhammad condemned female infanticide. Later revelations would give women legal rights in marriage, allow them to divorce, and protect their inheritance rights.
Of course, it's absurd and anachronistic to expect Muhammad to be a feminist in the 21st century sense. But nevertheless, what he did for women in the context of his time was amazing.
Although most women were second-class citizens in pre-Islamic Arabia, Muhammad's own wife, Khadija, was wealthy and powerful.
There's been this idea that women prior to Islam were chattel, that they had no rights. And I think that for many, many levels of the women, that is true. But for a certain level of woman, which Khadija would have been amongst, that is not true.
Khadija is an inspiration because in spite of the male-dominated society that she lived in, she was a working woman. And so there are some parallels for modern women to learn from her example. I grew up in Kashmir, which is in the foothills of the Himalayas in northern India. And I came to America when I was 15 years old. As I started becoming part and parcel of this culture and society, I gravitated towards just wanting to be like everybody else and tended to stray away from my own faith. And for a while there, I went through some very, very dark stages in my life where I wanted nothing to do with my faith. And I almost just walked away from my faith. And as I got older, I recognized that there was this very empty hole inside of me. So I started searching for God in all kinds of places. You know, Rumi has this beautiful story where he says, I looked for God, I went to a temple and I didn't find him there. Then I went to a church and I didn't find him there. And then I went to a mosque and I didn't find him there. And then finally I looked in my heart and there he was. The challenges that I faced in my life are the very same challenges that a lot of young girls are facing. And when they come to me with their questions, I feel like a person who has already traveled the road. I dispense advice to them from real experience as to how I would have dealt with something.
I've noticed how when it comes to women, we are only supposed to marry Muslim men. Why is that now? Especially because the Quran says that believing men and women should marry believing men and women. It doesn't point out that men can marry such and women can't.
I've heard plenty of people say that. In fact, that's interpretation.
Some of the issues are deeply personal. Issues with gender relations, like dating and marriage. And other issues have to do with certain Islamic law and how to reconcile with some of those things.
I want to change with her. See, hers is prettier.
And these are all sticky wickets, as we say. The fact that I've walked the walk helps a little bit for me to dispense advice to these people. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah.
In Mecca, opposition to Muhammad was growing. His message of monotheism and his campaign against idolatry threatened the lucrative trade that fueled the Meccan economy.
The business of Mecca is to draw pilgrims to Mecca. They want to make money. And the way they draw pilgrims to Mecca is people come visit their gods. Well, here's somebody who's saying, these gods, they're not real. They're stones. They're rocks. You're wasting your time. Now, that message has economic implications to the Quraysh. They're worried. This man is going to undermine our business.
In the tribal system, Muhammad was protected by his uncle, Abu Talib. So the Meccans went to Abu Talib and asked him to turn Muhammad over to them.
Abu Talib was in a difficult position. He was not a Muslim. But it went against the grain for him to simply hand over his beloved nephew to these people who would kill him with impunity. So he took Muhammad to one side and said, look, don't do this to us, can't you just keep quiet?
And at that point, the Prophet says, if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left hand, I will not stop preaching what I am preaching until this message is conveyed or I die conveying it. And this is what he tells his uncle, and at that point he begins to weep. And his uncle looks at him and realizes the depth of the conviction of this man. And he says, say whatever you want.